the t-shirt color clarification. That was entirely for the benefit of my 9-year-old Emma, who is deeply convinced that they are purple. And I love it because girlfriend is willing to go up against the entire church and convince the rest of us that we've got the color wrong. And I love that about her. Speaking of parenting, it is a unique season of life. It presents interesting challenges when your children become old enough to start reading books that you have either just left laying around the house or books that are on your shelf, right? So like the famous story in our family, one night I had come home from somewhere, grabbed a shower, I'm coming back into our room, and there, sprawled out on my bed, is Jack reading a book called Dad Tired, which is a good book about parenting in general and fatherhood in particular. But I kind of, I'm like, wait, what are you doing? I'm like, trying to be like, what other topics are in this book? And what's going, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm just reading about the things you're supposed to be doing in my life. And I'm like, this is a terrible idea. I need you to put this down. You don't know how badly I'm screwing you up until you start reading the books. And, this is, so I'm like, dude, no. I don't think we need you reading parenting books. He's like, no, it's cool. You're doing a pretty good job. I'm like, okay. Thank you, / what do we do with this new season of life? So Jack and I now have this, growing library of shared books. And if you were to look at just which book have we both read the most, it is a book called Unreasonable Hospitality, written by a man named Will Guidara. And in the book, Will tells the story of how he led 11 Madison Park to become the #1 restaurant in the world. And they did all of the normal things. Obviously, they hired a world-class chef and had phenomenal food, and they were right in Manhattan and had great ambiance. But the entire premise of the restaurant is they were going to practice what Will called unreasonable hospitality. That was going to be the thing that distinguished them from all of the other restaurants. So mainly in the book, Will's just telling story after story of what this ethos of unreasonable hospitality looked like, right? A couple examples of that. Like he just tells about the amount of intentionality that they put into thinking through how it was that they were going to deliver the check at the end of a meal, right? Because there's like really big tension of like, nobody likes to wait for the check. Nobody wants to have to like signal the waiter to come over. But if you bring it too early, it feels like you're rushing people out. And if they spent that kind of money on this kind of a meal, you don't want to be rushed out. So they finally devised this system where they would bring the check on the early side, but they would accompany it with a complimentary bottle, I think it was cognac, like on the house that they would, yeah, that's right, Jack's confirming, that they would bring that to the table sort of in the like, hey, when you're ready, feel free to pay the check. And in the meantime, kind of compliments of the house and enjoy this, right? So it's in the course of that book that he tells this famous story that you may have heard of, whether you track with the restaurant industry or not. It's his hot dog story where they had these diners that were in for lunch one day. They had traveled over from Europe. They're huge foodies. They've just been doing like a New York City food tour. They're finally kind of capping it off with lunch at 11 Madison Park. And Will happens to overhear as they're at their table just raving about the entire experience, raving about New York, raving about the restaurant, just raving about everything. And one of them just says, yeah, like honestly, my only regret is that we were in New York City and we never had like a hot dog from a street vendor. Like, what a missed opportunity. But they were headed to the airport. He knew he'd already checked their bags for him and stuff like that. They were going straight from the restaurant to the airport, and Will sent somebody from the restaurant out to like the hot dog vendor around the corner and purchased a New York City hot dog for them and brings it back into the kitchen and has the chef kind of chop it into 4 pieces and do something with ketchup and mustard, and he sort of brings it out to the table saying, hey, we didn't want you to leave New York with a single culinary regret. Here's the hot dog. And they just go crazy. They love it. It just like takes everything over the top of like, oh my goodness, like who does this? Who has the courage to do this at a restaurant that already has multiple Michelin stars? You don't go get like a hot dog from a street vendor and serve it in this kind of restaurant, right? What about the person 2 tables down that's trying to close a multi-million-dollar deal? You just don't do that. But they go crazy. He's like, that's the ethos that he was trying to create. Now, I'm bringing all that up not because we are in the restaurant or hotel business around here, but because we are, as a church and as the people of Jesus, very much in the hospitality business. Will is not a follower of Jesus. He doesn't really talk about faith or spirituality hardly at all. I believe he comes from a Jewish background, but one of the things that he has reflected on over the last couple of years is just how surprised he has been to see the traction that his book has gotten among followers of Jesus and pastors and leaders of various ministries, right? You write a restaurant book, it's no surprise that the management team down the road at Founding Farmers is reading it. That he was hoping for. But like, why do all these Jesus people like my book? Like, what's going on? Like, why has this resonated so much with the church? And, I'm not faulting him for this at all. He just doesn't grasp how central the practice of hospitality is for followers of Jesus. And clearly, I'm not faulting him for that, because I would say many of us in the room, we're in the same boat, right? If anything, we think about hospitality as maybe some kind of a personality trait or some kind of hobby or a fun thing to do if you have a free Saturday night and want to throw a dinner party. But to think of it as a core spiritual practice for us who are trying to live as disciples of Jesus, that sounds a little surprising. That sounds like maybe I've taken something that's just minor in the New Testament and tried to make a bigger deal out of it than God would intend. But let's just walk through a couple really basic passages, because I want you to see how important the practice of hospitality is for followers of Jesus. First of all, we see examples of it all over the scriptures, probably the most famous being Acts chapter 2, verse 46 to 47. Every day, this is the early church, first followers of Jesus, devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple. They broke bread from house to house. This is the near daily practice of hospitality. They're welcoming each other into their homes. They're sharing a meal. They're sharing life. They ate their food with joyful and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all people. We don't just see it recorded in the New Testament of like, okay, these early church people were a really big fan of a shared meal. We see it commanded in several places, including our primary text for today, Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. Do not neglect to show hospitality, right? You must practice hospitality. The command is given with force and a helpful anticipation that you and I are not going to be so much tempted to reject the idea of hospitality. Right? It's not like you're going to walk out of here today being like, man, all that hospitality nonsense, I reject it. Like, I don't want anything to do with being nice to other people and welcoming others into my space and, being nice to new people when they show up for the church at the first time. Like, I'm not doing any of that junk. We're not going to reject it, but we might neglect it, right? The temptation is going to be neglect. It's a good thing. It's just something we never really get around to, or it doesn't apply to our season of life or some other reason. Interestingly enough, though, if you want to see how central this practice is, we see it as a qualification for a widow to receive support from the church. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 9. No widow is to be enrolled on the list. This is the list of people that the church was going to provide for, what we would call our benevolence fund. You cannot be enrolled for support unless she is at least 60 years old, has been the wife of one husband, and is well known for good works. Paul then goes on to define those good works. That is, if she has brought up children, shown hospitality, washed the saints' feet, helped the afflicted, and devoted herself to every good work. And I realize that when I read 1 Timothy 5, some of us are like, oh, okay, I see it, this is great, but this is, not going to say it out loud, but this is obviously women's work. This is something for the women's ministry to think about. What does it look like to practice hospitality? Well, hang on, go back 2 chapters, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2. When laying out the qualifications to serve as an elder, when laying out the qualifications to serve as a spiritual leader in the church, verse 2 of chapter 3, an overseer, therefore, must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, self-controlled, sensible, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. This idea of practicing hospitality is central to what it means to live as a disciple of Jesus. So I know we took a little break over Easter, but we've been working through a series called The Work of ministry, asking what is it that we are to be about as the people of God. And we're going to conclude that series today by talking about this work of hospitality. And my goal is simply to show you why it really does matter for us as followers of Jesus, why this is not an optional extra or a hobby, or look, if you have like a really amazing Pinterest page, today's sermon is for you, but for the rest of us, just like pray and read your Bible. It's like, no, this is for all of us, right? So we're going to start by looking at what is the motivation for hospitality, which, by the way, if the temptation is going to be to neglect it, this motivation thing is a really big deal, right? We're looking for something that would inspire us to do what we know is good, what we believe is valuable, right? So don't just gloss over the next few minutes of motivation at all. But you get the motivation back to Hebrews 13:2. Don't neglect to show hospitality. It's a command. It's an imperative verb. You got to do this. Here's the reason. For by doing this, some have welcomed angels as guests without knowing it. There's your motivation, right? Now, stick with me because I can feel the eye roll, right? I can, in some cases, see the eye roll where you're like, oh, come on. Please tell me you are not about to do some version of like, hey, you got to be nice to everybody because who knows? Could be an angel. Like, right? I mean, some of you, the internal dialogue is like, look, man, you've never met my sister-in-law. And she could be a number of things, but I do not believe she's an angel. I am willing to bet she is not. Right? After Thanksgiving last year, we had a spirited discussion of like, man, she's not an angel. She might be the other thing. Like, I'm like, it's not, don't give me this like, hey, you never know, could be an angel. Like, what in the world is going on? Like, I want to encourage you, when you come to passages like this in the Bible, don't just read it quickly and move on to something you understand. Ask questions. Be like, what in the world is going on here? Like, what's happening here? And it's not just this idea of like, look, it could be an angel. You never know. This is a letter written to the Hebrews. We don't know who wrote it, but we know who it's written to. So it's written to a group of people who were very familiar with what we would call the Old Testament, what they would have just called the Bible, the scriptures. Right? These are people that knew the Word of God. By the way, as an aside, it's really clear Hebrews is written by somebody with a high level of education, and that person is writing to what they believe is an educated and sophisticated audience. There's a lot of Old Testament references in the letter of Hebrews. But my point is, the people that first got this letter, they would not have been confused. They would have been like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. This is a clear reference back to something that happened in Genesis chapter 18. We pick it up in verse 1. The Lord, Yahweh, appeared to Abraham at the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent during the heat of the day. He looked up and he saw 3 men standing near him. Right? This is already unusual. How do these guys approach undetected? But more importantly, they've come during the heat of the day. That's not when people would have traveled in the ancient Near East. It's blazing hot. You either travel in the morning or you travel in the evening. The fact that they're showing up at noon is unusual. Moreover, the custom of the day would have been for Abraham to sort of have his midday meal and then get ready for a nap, right? He's sitting in the entrance of his tent because it's a cool place, but he's just trying to cool down, get a little space before he's going to take a nap. So if you were to come up with what would be a bad time for somebody to show up at your house, this would be the definition. You're not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be getting a nap. It's really hot, yet these three guys are here. When he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them. He bowed to the ground and said, "My Lord." By the way, that is a form of Adonai, which can be used to refer to God, but does not need to be at all. It's a form of deference, oh master, oh sir, whatever. Abraham does not recognize that this is Yahweh himself coming. He just thinks these are three different guys. "My Lord, if I have found favor with you, please do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought that you may wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. I will bring a bit of bread so that you may strengthen yourselves. This is why you have passed your servant's way. Later, you can continue on." All right? It feels like somebody's been reading Unreasonable Hospitality. Right? Because you may have heard it before that the idea of welcoming a traveler was an essential component to life in this day and age. And that is absolutely true, right? There were some fledgling guest houses, right? There was an inn. There's no room for Mary and Joseph at the inn. But it's largely before, hotels and Airbnb and all that kind of stuff. So in general, if you were on a journey, the kindness of strangers was your plan A for how you were going to go from A to B. So you're like, okay, look, I see what you're doing here. There are a bunch of travelers. Abraham does the custom of the day. Okay, in this case, it just turns out to be God himself coming down here. All right, well, hang on. Abraham goes way over the expectation of the day. Keep reading verse 6. "So Abraham hurried into the tent and said to Sarah, his wife, 'Quick, knead 3 measures of fine flour and make bread.' Abraham ran to the herd and got a tender, choice calf. He gave it to a young man who hurried to prepare it. Then Abraham took curds and milk, as well as the calf that he had prepared, and set them before the men. He served them as they ate under the tree." Sure, it may have been the expectation of the day that if he had water, he would give them something to drink. The idea of washing their feet was way above and beyond. The idea that he might ask his wife to bake a loaf of bread, that's not surprising. But the fact that there would be multiple loaves of bread and a choice calf, that he would be giving away curds and milk. I mean, this is the finest meats and cheeses. This is Abraham choosing to throw a Michelin star meal under the tree so his guests can dine al fresco while he washes their feet for them. He's way over the top in a delightful way. In a like, I can go get the hot dog from the street vendor kind of way. But what's going on? Why does Genesis 18 matter? Why does it matter so much that the author of Hebrews is talking about it centuries after it would have occurred? And the answer is fairly obvious. It's that Genesis 18 flows right out of Genesis 17, right? There's very little time that passes in between them. In fact, some would say there's almost no time that passes in between them. 2 major things happen in Genesis 17. One, this is where God institutes the covenant of circumcision, which probably just adds to the no, this is not a good time for Abraham to be hosting a dinner party and running around getting calves and all kinds of stuff. Right, so this covenant of circumcision is given in Genesis 17. And Abraham takes every male in his household, and they're now circumcised as a sign of distinction to the Lord. But that covenant really comes as a follow-up to the more important thing that we see in Genesis 17, which comes in verse 15 and 16. God said to Abraham, "As for your wife Sarai, do not call her Sarai, for Sarah will be her name. I will bless her. Indeed, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she will produce nations. Kings of peoples will come from her." So on a human, psychological, sociological level, in Genesis 17, God tells Abraham he's going to become something of a king. You're going to become the father of nations. You're going to have an heir. You are going to be this epic figure. And Abraham in Genesis 18 just starts to act like what God told him he was in Genesis 17. If you're going to be a king, why don't you act like it and welcome people lavishly? But I think there's something even more profound going on, because Genesis 17 is not the first time that God has a conversation with Abraham about an heir and about land and all of these different promises. That actually occurs for the first time in Genesis 15, right? That's where God says to Abraham, "I'm going to make you the father of many nations." The problem is that Genesis 15 is followed by Genesis 16. Because Abraham gets impatient. There's this promise from God that he's going to be the father of many nations, yet his wife has never had children and continues not to have children. So Abraham and Sarah come up with this hideous plan that, since you're not able to have children with me, what if you were to go into one of the servants in our house and to father a child with her? And Ishmael's born in Genesis 16, a son, but not an heir. Right? Abraham's first response as you read Genesis to the promises of God is he goes and he completely messes it up. Rather than trusting the faithfulness of God, he tries to take matters into his own hands, and he ends up conceiving a child with a woman against her will. At which point you would think, okay, game over. God's amazing in Genesis 15. And Abraham messes it up about as badly as you can in Genesis 16. I guess it's time to start over with a new family. Somebody find a new patriarch. Let's go looking somewhere else. This guy messed it up irreparably. The beauty of Genesis 17 is that after Abraham made about as big a mess out of the promises of God as you could, he comes back and he's like, okay, hey. So that was not the plan. That was not a good idea. But I am a faithful God. I am a merciful God. I am a forgiving God. I meant it when I said, I love you. I'm going to establish you. You're going to be the father of many nations. Let's try this again. It actually gives a little bit more context around the circumcision idea. Hey, I want you to have a reminder on your body that you really are different. You really are set apart. You really are distinct and holy for the purposes of God. The promise is still on. You're still going to be the father of nations. And I think that it was in that moment that Abraham realized just who he was dealing with this Yahweh. Yes, a God of righteousness and justice, but a God who is so merciful, so patient. This God who radiates steadfast love. And it's in that moment that something starts to shift in Abraham, and he's like, wait a minute, if that's how God has loved me, man, I just want to love everybody that way. That's our motivation for hospitality. Right? It's not just, man, let's create something that looks good on Instagram, or let's build community, or let's fight back against an epidemic of isolation and loneliness in our city. There's nothing wrong with any of that. In fact, there's something good with a lot of that. But what we're doing, our motivation, is we are trying to extend to others the lavish love that we have received from God. As Christ has treated me, so I will treat you. Which really sets the stage for the distinctive of Christian hospitality, right? Any good sermon defines basic terms and usually does it right up front. And to this point, I've largely failed to do that. I've just kept talking about hospitality like we all know what it means, or like it's just something we import from the restaurant industry. But let's see if I can fix it now, because now I think we have the foundation to really understand what's distinctive about Christian hospitality. Go to verse 1 of Hebrews 13 with me. Let brotherly love continue. And then verse 2, which we've talked about a lot. There is a hyper-intentional wordplay in the original language. Let brotherly love, right? Any good Pennsylvanian knows what that is in Greek. Brotherly love is Philadelphia, right? 3 words for love in the Greek language. Agape, the most common in the New Testament, eros, and then philos. Philos is the one that's used here, and adelphoi is the word for brother. So Philadelphia is brotherly love. Let your Philadelphia continue. Don't neglect to show, you know what the Greek word there is? Philoxenia. Love of the stranger. Right? Same philos, but xenia. It's the word that we get xenophobic from. You're afraid of the stranger. You're afraid of somebody that's different. What Paul, or whoever, I don't actually think it was Paul, whoever wrote Hebrews, whoever writes it, what he's doing here is saying, hey, you need to allow your Philadelphia to grow into philoxenia. Let your love for each other, let your love for your friends, let your love for your community grow and blossom and become love for the other. Sure, we practice hospitality with those we know. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9, be hospitable to one another without complaining. Right? We learn this hospitality in family and in friend groups and in community groups, and we learn hospitality within the community of the church. But the distinctive of Christian hospitality is our willingness to practice it with the stranger when Philadelphia becomes philoxenia. By the way, you see the exact same pattern in Romans chapter 12. Love one another deeply as brothers and sisters. Philadelphia, take the lead in honoring one another. Do not lack diligence and zeal. Be fervent in the Spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in affliction. Be persistent in prayer. Share with the saints in their needs. Pursue philoxenia, right? Let your Philadelphia become philoxenia. One of the things that I am most grateful for in our church is to date, you have helped us resettle 3 different refugee families here in the city of Alexandria. Yes, an act of mercy and justice, but also an expression of hospitality, also an expression of the command in Scripture to welcome the stranger, to treat the stranger, the immigrant, as a friend. Right? If you wonder how is it that the church can stand out in a world that has important but at times toxic debates about immigration and immigration policy, it's by saying, of course, governments have to make rules of who comes into the country and when and how and all of that. But the distinctive of the Christian church is, yes, but whoever you are, I welcome you as a brother. I welcome you as a brother in my church. I welcome you as a brother in my living room. I welcome you as a brother in my school and in my community and on my kids' soccer team. I welcome you as a brother. Right? That's not to ignore the hard and important questions that you need to ask as a country, but it is to be really clear that one of the hallmarks of Christian spirituality, going back to Saint Benedict, one of the first people to ever write down a rule of life, Benedict made it his ambition in life to greet the stranger as if he were greeting Christ himself. He said, you want to know what it looks like to live as a follower of Jesus? Greet the stranger as if you were greeting Christ himself. You want to stand out in the world? Live that way. Right? You want to show people that your faith is alive and it matters and Jesus is risen from the tomb and he's back from the dead and you're living as his disciple. Man, don't just be kind to the people at work that are easy to get along with. Don't just show honor to those who can help advance your career. Treat the one who annoys you as a brother. Treat the one who is difficult to deal with as somebody deserving of honor and dignity, made in the image and likeness of God. Right? Don't just sit with the cool kids at lunch. Sit with those who don't have anybody to sit with them. Show hospitality, right? Which brings us finally to our posture for hospitality. Go to verse 3. Remember those in prison, as though you were in prison with them, and the mistreated as though you yourselves were suffering bodily. We tend to think that he's just moved on to a different topic at this point, right? It's like, oh yeah, the hospitality thing, and then we'll do a little prisoner thing, and we'll talk about it. But really, it's an extension of the same conversation, because the author of Hebrews wants us to see that for us as followers of Jesus, hospitality is a proactive choice, not just a reactive response, right? It would make absolutely no sense if I got up here and talked about my friendship with John Michael, who's going to come in just a minute and lead us in communion. It was just like, guys, John Michael is such a good friend. And the evidence that I kept pointing to is like, look, every time he shows up at my door, I absolutely talk to him. And if he's thirsty, I let him have a water bottle. And you're like, oh, absolutely fantastic, great. I'm sure he appreciates the water. And, you know, if he's at your door, obviously he wants to talk to you. And you were like, hey, okay, well, I mean, I'm just curious, like, I mean, when he shows up at your door, it's because you've like called him and invited him over, right? I'm like, no, that's the weird part. I've never once called him and invited him over, but I'm just telling you, every time he shows up, I give him a little water bottle and a snack and I talk to him. And you're like, okay. I mean, but there are times that you like text him or call him to just see how he's doing or to follow up. And I'm like, yeah, no, so I don't do that. What I do is when he shows up at my door, water, snack, talk. Have you been to his house? No. Water, snack, talk. Right? You guys ever like made plans to like grab a drink after work? Water, snack, talk. When he shows up, water, snack, talk. We have such a meaningful friendship. You'd be like, you have such a screwed up, weird, lopsided misunderstanding of friendship. That would be an equally screwed up, lopsided misunderstanding of hospitality. Yeah, when somebody new shows up, I'll be nice. You know, yeah. When the moment calls for it, I'll do it. No. Our posture is, I'm looking for opportunities. Right? Definitionally, the prisoner's not able to show up at your door. Paul's like, yeah, that doesn't exonerate you from hospitality. It only elevates the importance of it. You're going to have to go to him. You're going to have to go to her. Right? This isn't just a question of how do we react when the need for hospitality comes into our world. It is this question of, will we reach out to those who would never have the courage to come to our door? Will we reach out to those who would never have the courage to show up at a church on Sunday because they cannot possibly believe that they would be welcome? Are we willing to be the ones that go and say, hey, you should come to church. We'd love to have you. You're going to be welcome. They're going to delight that you're here, right? Are we just reactive, or are we willing to go with God and the author of Hebrews, that we are reaching out and we are looking for opportunities to practice hospitality? By the way, that's why people love Will Guidara's hot dog story, right? There's a little proactiveness in there. There's a little like, hey, I'm listening. I'm looking for a way to bless you. I'm looking for a way to honor you. I'm looking for a way to love you well. Right? And he took all kinds of risks. You can't bring street food into a Michelin restaurant, and the chef is going to be super offended. There's going to be like all these different things that are going on, but he didn't care because he saw a moment. And he's like, man, I can light their day up. I could do something for them that they would not ask for by themselves. They would never in a million years ask for it. I'm just going to do it and watch their face light up. Would we live our lives that way, where we go out of our way looking for opportunities to delight and to bless others, where we are willing to overcome objections, to break rules, and on a really good day, shatter some social taboos? You're not going to talk to that person. You're like, yeah, I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm absolutely going to go talk to that person. That's what I do, because that's what God has done for me. Right? That was the whole point of Abraham's story. This man who had messed it up so unfathomably badly receives the grace and the mercy of God. And he's like, no brainer. I'm going to go do that for everybody else. Restoration City, at the end of the day, the call is for us to taste the grace and the mercy of God in such a way that it transforms how we view ourselves, but also in such a way that it transforms the way we interact with others. This is one of the easiest works of ministry to live out, and it is also one of the easiest to neglect. Right? The question that we need to wrestle with is not whether we're on board or not. Are we willing to make the changes? Are we willing to take the risks? Are we willing to be the one that walks across the room or across the street or across the corridor at work? Are we willing to be the one that extends our hand, not sure that the handshake is necessarily going to be reciprocated? Are we willing to be the ones who say, you know what, that Benedict guy was onto something a couple hundred years ago. I am going to greet others as if I were greeting Christ himself. I want to pray to that end. And then John Michael is going to come out, and he's going to lead us in taking communion as a way of reminding us of what God has done for us. But Father in heaven, we want to come to you. And God, I just want to say publicly, this is an easy one to talk about and a frustratingly difficult one to live out. The intention of Sunday so easily gets swallowed up by the chaos and the schedules and the demands of Monday. And Lord, I know the people that are in this room. I know there are no shortage of demands on our time. I know how busy the week can get. And to show up at church and feel like somebody's trying to put one more thing on your shoulders can feel so discouraging. So God, I just want to ask that you would take off any sense of burden, even any sense of obligation. God, that instead you would give us an excitement to think about what it would look like for us to live this out in our season of life. What does it look like to live this out with a couple of toddlers? What does it look like to live this out as a single 24-year-old guy? God shows, what could that look like? What does that look like for me? But God, more than anything, we want with Abraham to know that your grace and your mercy still extends to us, no matter how badly we've messed it up. No matter how big a mess we think we've made. So Jesus, come now, I pray.